Hi, Leslie Sanchez. I'm very excited to be here with Ron Beghetto. Ron has been we're very fortunate to have just led a panel called Encouraging Creativity Under Uncertainty. But he's an esteemed colleague who is the Pinnacle West Presidential Chair and Professor at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. Super excited to have Ron here. And we're going to have a deeper conversation, Ron, about some questions that came up yesterday during our opening panel when we were asked so many questions about not only identification of children and shaping and creating opportunities for them, but the question was around the difference between talented, creative, and curious children. And how do you identify, are they one and the same in terms of how these children learn? And if you were a parent, how do you manage that? And certainly as an educator, there's probably a lot of questions and maybe even restraints on how what they do and do not know that they can do in that capacity.
Sure. Well, I think that's a great question. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. I think one way to kind of frame this question is to recognize that all kids have creative potential. And so the way they kind of show that potential in different settings is going to be different. So in the case of a classroom, you might have a kid who's always sharing their curiosities in sometimes unusual ways and might catch the teacher off guard, and the teacher doesn't exactly know what to do with this and doesn't want to necessarily shut down that curiosity, but is kind of stuck feeling like, I'm not sure how to field this question. I don't even know where this is coming from, or how does this relate to what we're trying to do. On the other hand, you might have a kid who, for example, has a lot to say about something, but is kind of a little timid and not willing to kind of take the risk and really share what they're thinking, and just constantly does what's expected and how it's expected. But in the meantime, has all this kind of deep thinking around a certain topic that they might really be curious about, or have actually developed a deep talent in. So I think part of it is try to understand, okay, how are kids kind of showing this creative potential, and how are we responding to that? So I think that might be the first component, is kind of differentiating that.
Well, would some people think it's disruptive, or they're stalling, or are there missed signals? I know parents have missed signals. Sure, of course, yeah. But do teachers have those same mixed signals, maybe misidentifying, I don't know if that's the proper way to say that, their curiosity with maybe a unique talent they may have?
Right, yeah. So I think one way to think about this is, let's take the kid who, for example, says something that's unexpected and unusual. I mean, the truth is, you don't know in that moment whether that kid is willfully trying to disrupt your class, is confused, or actually has something creative underneath there. And so part of it is taking the time to kind of step in and try to explore that without kind of going off the curricular cliff edge, if you will. Right? And I think this is really important, not only for teachers, but also for kids to understand that part of what they want to do in a context like that is go ahead and share their ideas out, but also try to connect what's happening. So I'll give you an example, and my daughter's given me permission to tell these stories. So when my daughter was in elementary school, they were in math class and they were doing duration problems, for example, and the teacher asked a question before they were going to embark on these worksheets. Do you have any questions about time? Does anybody have any questions about time before we work on these duration problems?
What time till lunch?
Yeah, right, exactly. That's always a good question. But my daughter raised her hand and said, where does the time from yesterday go? And so that kind of threw the teacher off guard. And because my daughter had previously wrote a note in this class saying how she hated this worksheet factory, the teacher kind of rightly interpreted that as perhaps she's stalling or trying to disrupt this lesson because she doesn't seem to enjoy this class anyway. So what was confusing for my daughter is she legitimately had that question. So in the car ride home, we had this conversation, and she felt like, no, I really want to know where time from yesterday goes. So we had this conversation where I reminded her, like, okay, you're in third grade math. This isn't a philosophy seminar. I think it's a great question.
That's what you say to average third graders.
Right, but this isn't the right time or place for it. So I think part of what we can help kids know is like helping them read the environment. Is this the right time or place to take this risk and share out something that might not be seen as connected?
Right.
And then from the teacher or parent perspective, being willing to really listen to what kids are saying, and maybe if we can help make that connection or give them space to do that, then maybe we can see that, oh wow, there's something really deep here that can contribute to other kids' learning and maybe my own learning. And so I think part of it is the exploration on the part of the parent and teacher, but also the guidance to help kids make those connections or know a context where it might be more appropriate for them to raise these kinds of questions.
It's a fascinating way, and I think we're so appreciative of you telling your personal story. And I have to say that's one thing about NAGC that at this conference has been really enlightening, is how many professionals and academics and people that work in the gifted field are sharing their personal stories with their children, their own experiences with their children. And you're struggling as an academic with the same questions that any parent is saying, is my child gifted? Are these unique talents? And what resources and support should I be giving them? And what did you learn from your own experience?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, regardless of how much we know about a topic like creativity, in my case, for example, I think what we understand is the lived experience of that can sometimes be really painful. As a parent, we want our kids to be successful. We don't want them to experience school in negative ways. We want to support our colleagues that are teachers in schools. But there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of pressures placed on teachers and kids. And so helping them kind of do that both and, let's meet the learning goals, but also create openings where kids could do that in different ways, which is by definition creative, right? So by doing that, we can help kids pursue their interests, deepen their talents, and express their creativity in ways that people can actually hear and benefit from.
Can you explain just on that part about creativity, how creativity fits into the gifted program? Like, are they, in terms of how the brain works and how a child is identified, how do those, are they together, aligned?
So one way to think about creativity, the way that it's typically defined in the literature, is creativity is this combination between originality or doing things new or in a different way, and still meeting the task constraints, meeting the criteria. So it's this blend. It's not just unconstrained originality. So part of it is that kind of the original component of it, the doing things differently, that's the kid part of it. So that's where the kid can really express their interests in ways that maybe are unexpected to even the teacher. And then the other part of it is the criteria. That's where teachers and parents can help kids understand how that original expression or those curiosities can be connected to either what's happening in the classroom, the curriculum, or also, maybe a body of knowledge or a domain. So if a kid has a passion about science and they have their own ideas about that, helping them connect to what do we already know about this in the field of science.
Okay.
So it's this kind of both and blend, that it's not just unconstrained originality, but it's also not just kind of blind conformity. It's this blend of doing things differently within the constraints of the situation, task, or area of knowledge.
So that's going to be the best way to propel the child within a system.
Yes.
Right, so they can move into other areas that are gifted and take advantage of those efforts versus just kind of accelerating in one area that doesn't give them a structure to enter under other programs, I would imagine, or facilitation with the teacher.
Yeah, exactly. So creativity really is like structured uncertainty. I feel like one of the things that really has hampered creativity in educational settings, in general ed or in any educational context, is that we often think creativity is about thinking outside the box. But really it's about thinking creatively inside the box, working creatively within the constraints that we're facing. So that really is what creativity is about, is doing things differently while still meeting the criteria.
Right. I think a lot of Madison Avenue firms could really appreciate that. And agencies would probably appreciate how this whole conversation and dialogue around creativity has changed. If you want to learn more about Ron Beghetto's work, you can find him at ronbeghetto.com, which is great. You have a website. He has multiple books, a lot of writing in this area, but I'm intrigued, and I want to ask a little bit about your most recent book called Beautiful Risk, Having the Courage to Teach and Learn Creativity. What is your big takeaway, if you had to give it for parents in that sense, and maybe a couple for educators as well?
Yeah, so the idea behind the book, Beautiful Risk, and the notion of beautiful risk, the way I define that is doing things creatively, whether it's creative parenting or supporting your own child's creativity or teaching creatively or learning creatively, it really is a risk. It may not work out because you're doing something different, right? But the idea here is it's a beautiful risk because the potential for you to make a contribution not only to your own understanding, but to the learning and lives of others outweighs the kind of risk that it might not work out. So it's really driven by trying to make a contribution to the learning and lives of others. So in the case of parents, it's about creating spaces for your kids to try some things out, maybe make some mistakes, maybe fail, but still be supported and otherwise do that in a structured environment. So that's one end of it. For teachers, it's the same sort of thing. Opening up your curriculum to let kids share out their own ways of thinking, their own ways of doing things, while still providing the support and structure they need instructionally. Doing so, again, is a risk, but it's beautiful because it can lead to learning that actually grows in your classroom, grows in your home, and actually benefits you and others.
I love it. And my final question, what are you most excited about Gifted now? In terms of, you've been in this field for a very long time, where you see kind of it going nationally and the impact it's having?
So my work is really in creativity studies generally. I mean, I think it absolutely has application to gifted. I think the field of gifted education has always been a field that has recognized creativity as important. I think now in general education and in all education systems, both in K-12 and higher ed, we're seeing recognition that we need to support young people in responding creatively to the uncertainty they face in this ever-changing world.
Right. It's interesting because you think about like young high school students who are using technology now in creative ways through the structure of technology, like creating apps or coding to solve problems that are unique to them in ways nobody ever thought of. So
that's
it's
right.
It's a kind of that application of solving things that are important to them.
Yeah, and I think I'll just kind of leave it at this thought. I think the thing that I'm most excited about that people are recognizing is when we face uncertainty, we have to think and act in new ways. And the way to do that is to be creative, right? So uncertainty is something that we're sometimes afraid of, but really it's a sign that we need to try to think and act in different ways. And to the extent that we can provide experiences for young people to develop their confidence and competence doing that, then we're really doing a great job of supporting them and being creative in and outside of school.
And comfortable with uncertainty.
Exactly, yes.
That's a life skill.
That is a life skill.
Thank you so much for joining
you.
us at NAGC.